Hey friends, good to have you here today. We are glad that you joined, and literally we just prayed with this group just a few minutes ago that what happens in these next few moments would really be a spark to you, that would really give you just a different perspective, different eyes for the kingdom, and maybe even how God could use you to shift in your heart through what you do, through how you lead, through how you engage the kingdom. We just want Jesus to do whatever he wants to do in you and through you. And I think right now we've got four pretty amazing people here to talk. We've got Dr. Joy Walton, Dr. Amari Hodge, Dr. Matthew Maddox. We were talking about Matthew. It's a great name. Love that name. And then Dr. Sabrina Black. And so every single one of them are far more intelligent than I am, and we're going to have an incredible conversation. And so I'm going to just start this right off the bat by just asking each of you, if you don't mind, starting with Dr. Joy, would you mind just introducing yourself and tell us who you are and what you're passionate about, and what that brings us to today?
Sure thing. Thanks for having us. We're so excited to be here. My name is Joy Walton. I'm a med peds doc. I'm based in Columbus, Ohio, where I've been practicing for the last 13 years, both hospital-based and outpatient. Recently moved into an associate program director position of a medicine residency program, and very, very passionate about really increasing health equity, particularly in the infant and maternal mortality space.
Dr. Amari, let's go with you next, if that's all right.
Yeah, my name is Amari Hodge. Recently moved into a program director position here in Tampa, Florida, Wesley Chapel to be more specific. Been involved with CMDA for going on 16 years. And one of the things I'm very passionate about is international healthcare, and more specifically, having a multicultural focus as we do those things. And I think events like this not only help me, but help others who want to learn how to make that happen and bring that into fruition, a possibility.
All right, Dr. Matthew.
Hey there, Dr. Matthew Maddox. I am a doctor of physical therapy. I am based out of Richmond, Virginia, and recently actually just got hooked up with Dr. Omari and Dr. Joy here. We're all a part of a committee together. So really excited just to continue not only to serve, but actually to learn with them. One of the things I think is missing is that a lot of times there are not things on both perspectives that are gained. It's usually one side of the equation or the other. So I look forward to continuing to learn and grow from them and everybody else here on this panel. My wife, Crystal, is also in healthcare. She's a dentist, and we have gone on quite a few mission trips together as far as that goes. So just looking forward to seeing how that goes with dealing with different cultures.
And Dr. Sabrina Black.
Hello, I'm Dr. Black, and I am a clinical director at Abundant Life Counseling Center. I am passionate about helping people live right, helping people to live the word of God and to deal with whatever their past traumas and issues may be that hinder them from living right. My background is in counseling psychology. I've been in private practice for the past 30 years, but I also have had the opportunity to serve on the mission field for the past 38 years, almost 40 years. I didn't realize it had been so long, but the Lord has opened many doors for me to be able to go and help people deal with issues of life regarding trauma and counseling and crisis intervention on the field. So I'm excited to be here. Also teach counseling and psychology at Moody Theological Seminary and teach missions for Detroit Bible Institute.
Wow, what a gift. Great group today. And excited. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to start teeing up. I've got some questions here, but we might kind of work our way through here and come back. But I've got a set of questions that literally from this group of people that they would love to just hear about. Number one, question one is, as we seek to make disciples who are color courageous rather than color blind, what would it look like for a multicultural mission team to address implicit or unconscious bias? And we're gonna figure this out as we go. We're just gonna have each, if you just want to stick up your hand and the first one in, we'll just have you hop right on in. Come on through.
I'll jump in right away.
I love it. Thank you, Dr. Black.
So, that was a big question. And if I'm listening to the question, I'm thinking, where do you begin with something like that? And my first thought is love. Because when I think about being on the mission field, usually the greatest challenge is the team. It's not the nationals, it's not the assignment, it's the people that you go to work with and the perspectives that they have about one another and serving with one another. And so I think one of the things to address in terms of this issue of implicit bias is helping individuals realize that God has called all of us to the field. And because he has called us, we all come equipped for the work that he's called us to do. And so to not question or challenge one another about what our particular assignments are, but to respect that and encourage that and to learn from what other people bring to the table.
That's so good. That's so good. Who else wants to chime in here?
Yeah, I'll piggyback off of that.
Yeah, please.
I'm so glad that Dr. Black laid that foundation, because I think many times when we go out on the mission field, we forget about the team. Everybody is thinking about going and serving the local population, which is a beautiful thing. They want to make a difference in people who don't have, which is a beautiful thing. But I think equally important is the team that's going. And as you described, Dr. Black, those interactions that we have before we get there, while we're there, and on the way back can be life-changing. And if I can challenge the team, my team, especially if I have a diverse team, to look at each member as somebody who they can learn from, and to empower each member in their own lives, saying that I give this person authority to speak to me. And I know that's kind of dangerous, because sometimes, let's just be honest, sometimes people put out things that are just not biblical or that are foolishness. But understanding that God is sovereign, I think that God can show you and give you the ability to learn from your team in ways that just are instrumental for the rest of your life. And I'll say this last and be quiet. And I think we need to remember that when these people are on the team, this is God ordained. I know we just signed up, somebody just saw something, but this was no accident for that you're sitting right next to the person that you're sitting next to, and you guys are talking about donkeys that you're looking out the window as you drive by. You don't know where those conversations will lead, but let's go there. Open the door, give them permission.
Yeah, that's interesting. As you mentioned that, the other thing to consider is that the people on the field, the people that we say we are going to serve, are watching us. And the Bible says that people are going to know that we are God's disciples by our love one for another. And it's not just the love of the people we're serving, but the love of the people that we're serving with. And so I just think about the many teams that I've been involved in, and just the conflict. So it's like that initial conflict before we decide that, okay, we really do love each other. We really do have something in common. We really do love Christ. We really do want to exemplify him in the earth. And so I think we have to come to that place and realize, man, I need to change my behavior, and I need to act like what I say I profess.
Yes. Yeah, I totally agree, Dr. Black. And I'll just say, in response to that question, this idea of color courageous discipleship comes from Pastor Michelle Sanchez, who's just published a book called Color Courageous Discipleship. I encourage you to look that up. But really, she helps outline kind of the shift that's happened just in the last century from, color blindness, which is the refusal to acknowledge the causes and consequences of enduring racial stratification, to this. The pendulum has kind of shifted now to, where we're kind of coming out of that. And a lot of, what happened in 2020 in the wake of George Floyd really, perked our ears up to be able to listen and to say, this color blindness of I don't see color. We're starting to recognize that that's a problem. And as she encourages, Pastor Michelle Sanchez in her book, to move towards a color courageous discipleship, what we're saying is that we're acknowledging the fact that, this is a superpower, and especially in the context of medical missions, when your team can exemplify the fact that you not only are not colorblind, but you see those as an outworking of God's kingdom working within just your team alone, and the power that has. And so, I encourage us to think about color courageous discipleship.
Oh, that's good. What do you think, Dr. Matthew?
Honestly, I agree with a lot with what has been said already. And the one thing I will also add to this is that a lot of times with these multicultural missions teams, this may be the first time that somebody is around somebody of a different ethnicity or culture than theirs, whether it's working on the team or the people that they're serving. I know, at least for me, where I grew up, I actually didn't have anybody in my school that was of a different ethnicity until I was in the 4th grade. So think about how many people just come from areas like that, of similar situations, where the only reason they have those biases are literally because they've never actually had the chances to explore them. Maybe their only understanding is what's been seen on TV or what they've heard in music or things like that. But when you actually get to sit down and know someone and see that they're just another person, just like you are, maybe just grew up a little bit differently, it can definitely knock down a lot of those barriers.
Yeah. Matt, if I can add, in addition to Michelle Sanchez, for people who will be doing research later, I would also encourage you to watch the TED Talk by Michelle Hobson, who talks about this idea of color courageous as color brave, to be able to be comfortable being uncomfortable, because sometimes talking about racial issues is hard. and we want to avoid those conversations as opposed to engage them and confront them. And when we say confrontation, we confront because we care and because we love, not because we're just trying to check people or put them in their place. And so I think we need to change our definition of confrontation and realize that it's an important piece of what we need to do if we're going to deal with this racial issue.
Yes.
Yeah, and you know what you said, Dr. Black, and what I loved, and from just spending time on the mission field, one of the things the main thing you talked about is the open door. For a lot of you out there, it's starting with love. So you are going to, by nature, when you go on a trip, you are going into a different place, a different space, whether it's downtown, different part of town. You're opening people's eyes to, for the first time, sometimes they see the cultural differences. But then when you put on that supernatural love, then you also, even within your team, can start to help them start to understand and to look back into their own world where they've gotten so used to some things that maybe they haven't even noticed those cultural differences. They have been, to your point, they have been colorblind. They were trying to take it out of the equation. When in reality, it's more around us than we know. And so when you open these people up, when you have this moment, like you were saying earlier, this is an ordained moment from God. Leverage the moment. Leverage that moment to really say, okay, we're not just on mission together, but man, I love these people, and I have a window to really shift something in them. Lord, give me the capacity to love them, even if they say something crazy. Not that that's ever happened. But also then to lean in and to just say, okay, Lord, where are you going to take this? So let me hit question number 2. So then, how, and I'm assuming a lot wealth of knowledge, how could a multicultural mission team start to help dismantle misconstrued agendas from within and outside the team? So let me frame it up like this. You've got a team, and you know how this is. They think they know why they're going. But now you're the leader and you're saying, okay, we're going to walk away with something beautiful and something powerful here. How do you begin dismantling some of these agendas from within the team and really from within and outside the team, maybe expectations on the outside and inside? How do you start to dismantle that? Is that helpful? Who'd like to hop in here?
As you were talking, I thought about something, and I think this illustration maybe is a good answer to that question. I remember going on a mission team, going on the mission field with the team. Mm-hmm. And we had a leader who, let's just say, was very narrow in the way that he saw mission work. He had an idea of what he expected to accomplish, and he also had an idea of how that would take place. And so much so that at times it even caused that person to, what's the word I'm looking for? I don't want to say chastise, that's too strong, but maybe speak to the local team in a stern manner about what he thought was the correct way to deal with the locals in his areas regarding specific issues, because he thought he was too harsh. And I say all that to say I know I'm being intentionally vague, and the point that I'm trying to make is when I did that same trip the next year, because I saw things very differently than he did, I recognized that the biggest thing that I could do for my team was to make sure that my team saw how much I respected and admired the local team that was there. They needed to know that these people who think differently, look differently, talk differently, and act differently than us are in a position of power right now. Mm-hmm. And that's intentional. Now, obviously, that means as long as they're following the word of God and doing things that, we all understand. That's intentional, because I think the rest of the people then on my team followed suit. And they said, okay, we too want to respect and honor the locals here and give deference to the way that they think we should handle certain situations. From that one little example, what I noticed was the local team invited us socially and spiritually to areas in their hearts that we never saw the previous year. We had an experience one night. I couldn't even put it into words how intimately, there's a scripture, Psalms 133, it says how beautiful it is when brethren dwell together in unity. And at the end it says, there the Lord commanded his blessing. That's kind of what I feel like we experienced. But it started with us understanding that there are going to be things that we see and experience that are not quite the same, but we have to be willing to feel, to allow ourselves to feel uncomfortable until we hear and are able to unlock what the Spirit of God is doing in those moments. And that's not an equation. There's not an algorithm. I wish it was. I know we like that in medicine. That's actually something that you really just have to yield to the Spirit of God and ask Him to do a transformative work in your heart.
Yes.
Good.
You know, I'll just say that I'm a Korean American, and I'm a daughter of Korean missionaries. And whenever I explain that to folks, the first question I get is, well, where are your parents missionaries to? And I say, they're missionaries to the United States of America. Because 40 years ago, when their pastor said, South Korea, as you may know, is a very large sending nation. And their pastor was encouraging them and praying over them. And they had their hearts set on going to Ethiopia. And he goes, you know what? America needs missionaries more. But, you know, I always tell that story and people kind of laugh. And I will always kind of follow up with, you know, Jesus never said that the Great Commission is from east to west or west to east. Like, he didn't give us that directionality. He said, go into all the world. I think there's just this, I think that it's important to acknowledge, especially in medical missions, that historically the context has been, this is a white man's religion, and that there can be misconstrued political agendas, whether they're really there or not. That the perception there is that, you know, if you have, I was just looking up some of the stats from World Vision, less than 1% of medical mission teams are made up of African-American men and women, then, you know, there's going to be a message, whether that's implicit or explicit, that this is a white man's religion. So I think it's just so important that built into the team is this Revelation 7:9, you know, that this is God's kingdom happening now, and that this isn't a color religion, that this is good news for everyone.
Yeah, as we talk about this idea of dismantling, I think Omari talked about it well when he gave his example of this us versus them mentality. You know, it's all of us together. You know, Jesus was incarnate in the world. He came and dwelt among us. And so I think for us, as we go to do missions, we need to go and dwell among a people who are living there and doing life, whether we're there or not. Yeah, so we need to respect the culture and respect the fact that they know how to live, even though we may not agree with the way they do what they do. You know, there was a story I heard a while back, and I can't remember what the origin of it was, but it talked about how it was a town or a village where the people stood at a tree with one saw, and they just sawed back and forth all day long, and they took turns using the saw. And then when the missionaries came, they thought, oh, we can fix this. And they brought buzz saws in, and they were chopping down trees, and they were cutting these trees to build boats. And so they had like one boat built at the end of the year. So when the missionaries came, brought the buzz saws, they came back, the whole river was full of boats. But the city was burnt down. The village was torn apart, and everybody was in conflict and in war. And they asked, what happened? He said, the missionaries came. And I thought, what a sad commentary. The missionaries came, and without understanding the context and the culture, they came and fixed something that wasn't broken. The people stood at the tree and had communication, and they talked about village life as they saw it one at a time, versus with the buzz saw knocking everything down, and now there's no sense of community and unity. So we got to be careful about what we say we go to fix, because some things aren't broken. It's just not the way we would do it.
Yeah, I would agree with that as well. Just to chime in, one of the examples that I would even have is on a mission trip I was at in New Mexico to help the Navajo people. And one of the things that they mentioned was one of the teams that they actually had the worst experience with was a team that tried to get them to basically change the way that they did music, because the Navajo liked to use certain types of instruments and sing certain types of way, and the team there did not like to sing like that. They thought it was weird or wrong. But the reality, as was said before, as long as they're honoring God, who are we to come in and sit here and say, you need to change this thing, instead of thinking it from the every tribe, nation, and tongue? Maybe there are going to be some differences, but is it any less honoring to God?
You know, as you guys are talking, one of the resources that I definitely want to make sure that our people who are listening to this have at their disposal is When Helping Hurts. Is an amazing book that kind of illustrates how sometimes our best intentions can go wrong, and that things fall apart, by Chinwe. I always forget his last name. I'll get it wrong, but you guys can look it up on Google. An amazing illustration of a colonial Nigerian village, and the effects that good versus bad mission work and what that looks like.
I just have one final comment, which is to add that when we talk about diversity, we're not just talking about racial diversity, ethnic diversity, but we're also talking about socioeconomic diversity within teams, theological diversity. Like, it's okay for the Methodists and the Catholics to come on the same team. Gender diversity, generational diversity. That is really the picture that we want to create within teams, and I think it just has so much power.
Yeah, and even as you're saying this, I'm thinking. So I did 20 years ish with student ministry, and we would take roughly 100 to 120 students out of the country every single year, and in the process, what you all just explain, especially for somebody out there that's listening, how do you start to dismantle? And what I'm hearing is, and what's something that's really beneficial, it's the power of story. It's the power of, so here's what happens when it's really making sure that you're not going to step in without really giving them context. And you mentioned it a little bit, honor for, that you're setting a table for them, not just for the mission and those people, but for people to really understand. And again, I think I heard this with each one of you. And then once you see it, name what you saw. As soon as you see that, it's the power of somebody on a trip saying, okay, do you know what you just saw? Do you recognize that it wasn't like this last year because this is what we did this year, but this is how we entered this time? Do you see what it unlocked? It's giving eyes to people that may not normally have eyes for these types of things. And so I'm going to kind of lead in and Dr. Walton, you literally led us right in here. Because here's the reality, what does it look like for a multicultural team to serve people who may have cultural differences that would cause us to disagree, which we've mentioned a little bit, such as serving in a different area with different religious or doctrinal preferences. So if we're, to your point, not, both on the ground, but also within a team, we like to think we're all, tribe Jesus. But sometimes those things can really get in the way and can really get us off base, and people are trying to fix preferences or fix this. So what have you experienced? You've been on these trips. Do you have any ideas on how do you step in? Again, I want this to be multicultural. I want them to walk away, but I want them to really see the beauty. I always say kind of the beauty of the Big C Church, that she's a quirky girl, but man, is she beautiful. She is just gorgeous, right? So give me what you have. What have you experienced?
So one of the things that I will say is one of the most important things is to realize, almost like we mentioned in the last question, why are we there, right? Are we there to get down to nitpick things, or what is the most common goal that we're there for? It's to help spread the word of God, right? So maybe one person thinks, like, some people, just as an example, some people want to dunk somebody all the way under the water for baptism. Some people think sprinkling water on the head is okay. But does that change the fact that the person heard the word of God while we were there? I think this is one of those things where we have to figure out what is the root cause of what we disagree on, and also just focus on what we need to do to come together to make sure that we keep the main thing the main thing.
Mm.
That's so well said. As you were asking the question, and as I was listening to Dr. Maddox, I've been kind of stealing from Dr. John Perkins a lot here recently because we spent some time with him. But I think I'll answer this question the same way he answered his question when we posed it to him. He said one of the things that we deal with is a language issue. And from that, I think people all hear what they have been trained unknowingly to hear. And we have these filters that we use as we navigate life. And the same sentence said to two different people can elicit very different responses. I think sometimes, especially if you do have a multicultural team going into an area that can be nebulous, meaning that you have different religious contexts and different preferences and things of that nature, having an understanding of what terms mean, an agreed upon shared understanding about what we're speaking about when we say certain things, I think that helps ensure that as we have conversations moving forward, everybody's at least hearing the same things. I mean, they still may process them differently because we're all individual people, but you don't want your message to be unintentionally digested in a way that you didn't even intend, because you didn't spend the time preparing the dinner plates the way that they need to be prepared. And we don't normally think about that, because in your environment, everybody, I I don't know what your environment is, but most of the time in the environments we live, we don't have to do that. People think like us, they talk like us, and they understand things the way that we do. But that's not going to be the same thing. I'll say this one thing and I'll be quiet. There's a book out called When Helping Hurts by Erin Meyer. And one of the things that she did in her books that I thought was brilliant, she talked about the differences between low context and high context societies. High context societies, just to give an example, would be places like Japan. They would be places like certain areas in Africa, areas that have been the same with an homogenous group of people for long periods of time, where everybody understands the same thing. Where low context society, I don't know of anyone lower than America. Everybody has different levels of understanding and different experiences. In the low context societies, we'll say that we're going to send an email. We send the email and we send a follow-up about what we emailed, because we don't presume that anybody understands anything that we're speaking about. In high context society, you could say the tree fell and you meant 3 paragraphs worth of information from that one sentence. But because the context was the same, everybody understood. What I'm saying is, when you take these multicultural teams, you have to assume a low context society. And that means you have to spell things out even more so than you would normally do, so that people will leave with a complete understanding of what you're trying to convey.
All right, Omar, you're opening doors here. So Matt, I'm not sure how far you want us to go, but one of the things I realized, especially from a counseling psychology context, is that the more transparent people are, the more vulnerable people are, the more healing takes place. And I believe that part of what we're looking to do is help people heal so that they can be effective when they go on these teams and not cause the problems that we say we're going to help. And so one of the things recently on a trip, and it dealt with Asian and African American. And talking about this idea of context and how when people don't explain context from a leadership perspective of why they're making certain decisions, it allows for all types of historic racism to run rampant, because everybody is presupposing what is meant by what is said versus a clear understanding of what happens. A situation in point, on a recent trip, my roommate and I, Asian American, African American, we bonded. So our first night, we were intentional about connecting. So we spent the night getting to know each other and finding out what we had in common, as opposed to how we were different. So we really wanted to stay roommates, but we found out when we were moving to our next location, everybody had new roommates, and we were like, man, we want to be together. But we realized, okay, this is an opportunity for us to get to know somebody else and to share the love that we experience. So at the hotel, I am the first person in line to get assigned a room. And I'm waiting as other people walk past me and get their room assigned. And I'm still standing there waiting, and other people walk past. And so I finally say something. I'm thinking, okay, do they not see me standing here? And so I said, hey, I'm waiting. I'm kind of was the first person in line. They says, oh, no, well, just wait. And I'm waiting and waiting. Now, this was not a real good example of the first shall be last, because I was the last person to get assigned a room. Now, I got to tell you, if I had not dealt with my own personal issues of dealing with racism, oh, that could have been all kind of ugly. But I just kept standing there thinking, okay, why am I the last person to get a room? Now, clearly, I knew why. Because the leader was trying to accommodate me and my roommate. They were trying to move other people around to different rooms so that the two of us could still be together. But for other people who were watching, people were coming over to me saying, are you okay? I know you've been standing here. Are you okay? Are they ignoring you because you're Black? So again, all this historic stuff that everybody comes with because they don't understand the context of what's happening can create problems for a team if it's not explained. We knew, and we were laughing the whole time as we were standing there waiting, but we understood by the time we got to the end, the two of us were together. I was like, whew, we're still roommates. Yeah. But it didn't look like that as I stood there watching one person after the other walk in front of me and get assigned a room. Context.
So good. Yeah, I'll just add, this has been so great, but I had a long-term medical missionary who just came back from a Southeast Asian country share with me about context, and shared a story of a woman who was coming in with her 5th pregnancy, and the baby needed to be sectioned, and there was no way that she was going to be able to be delivered safely vaginally. And so in that context, they have to get the permission from the husband, and they brought him forward, and he said, absolutely not. nope, I will not give consent. And they made it very clear the baby and the child will die. And the medical missionary told me she's a family physician who is really focused on women's care and was just so angry, just simmering in her anger, trying to find a way to get through to him and just could not. And finally kind of stepped outside, and someone who'd been a longtime national there kind of approached her and said, do you realize what's happening here? And she said, no, tell me. And she'd only been there for a few months at that point. Said the man serves, this husband is the head of this household of multiple generations, of multiple children and grandchildren, and multiple villagers in that, people in that village. And it would cost him the cow that he had in order to pay for his wife's surgery, C-section. And what the medical missionary didn't know was that he was unwilling to sacrifice the cow, because if he sacrificed the cow, many, many more people would die. And so that just that context is everything, right? And I think just kind of going back to Dr. Perkins and what Dr. Hodge was talking about, this language of love. Ultimately, we are building a community of beloved, and that's really all it is. And so whatever that language is, but understanding context helps to give us that language of love.
That's so good. So let me tell you what I'm hearing, and I'm gonna keep moving. I love this. Is what I'm feeling, a prevailing theme of to do this, it's going to take a guide. To do this, it's going to take a lot of intentionality. And one of my favorite passages, Romans 8:19. If we ever have time and you're in town for coffee, I'll tell you the story. But in ministry, I remember when I came on to creation waits with eager anticipation for the sons and daughters of God to be revealed. And it's kind of the hinge in Romans there where it says, the whole world is aching, groaning for you to just figure out what it means to be a son, to be a daughter. And so I'm sitting here literally listening to you all, drinking in your years and drinking in your experiences and your wisdom. But it really takes that. It really takes a commitment to you're not going to just lightly stumble into really allowing the Lord to use you in a multicultural way, to build multicultural teams, to have a rich understanding of a multicultural setting, and to step in there with honor and dignity until you really give your heart and your mind and your life to it and say, no, this is who I am in Christ, and therefore that's what I'm going to be directed in. And so you if that's you out there, you're seeing some very seasoned people that they already have books that they've quoted and lots of stories. You may not have that yet, but I think they would tell you, but if you commit your heart to this, if you commit your spirit to this and say, Lord, I want to be used like this, then He is going to lean you in with intentionality. It's not going to happen accidentally. You're going to need intentionalities. And so I want to keep going. This is great. We probably have time for about one more question, if that's all right with you all. And I think the one that I'm going to settle on here is, so give me some of the best ways to bridge the gap between who we serve and their hesitations and fears of other races, which could cause them to not receive help ever, even when they need it. So I was listening to one of those conversations, and just what's a meaningful and realistic change we should hope to see through diversity and mission. So if it's kind of two-part, right? One is what's the change that we want to see by helping people, but also just the change in these groups. I just want to give me some meaningful, realistic change that you all hope to, give me your dream, right? Give me your vision behind this of how do we help people get over their fears locally in our groups. What would be a realistic, meaningful change that we would hope to see through diversity and missions? And I'm gonna go right down the line, and Dr. Walton, I'll start with you, and we'll just go right on through.
Yeah, that's a tough one. I have lots of dreams about that. Because as a medical student, I remember being told by a medical student who was a year ahead of me that you really shouldn't be doing medical missions because short-term medical missions are so damaging. They hurt more than they help, and you could have given your plane ticket away and helped those people in Honduras that you went to just 6 months ago. And that really impacted me, and it kind of stayed with me. It took me a while before I could really convince myself that this was something that was worth doing. And then as I have gotten more into the equity and diversity space, wanting to see that come to fruition, especially coming as a second culture kid. So so, one of the things that kind of came to mind was, I think one of the questions that we probably just didn't get to was, well, why is this so important? Why I already have so much trouble getting teams together in the first place. I can't afford to sort of be picky about who I get to choose. Just kind of a first come, first serve. If I even get enough docs and dentists on this team and optometrists, I'm good. I'm going to take who I want. Or said another way, if we put Jesus first, like, why does it really matter? And that's, it gave me pause. And I think that's fair. I just think that there is a missed opportunity to really share the gospel in a way that is exemplified in a way that is so transparent and intrinsically carries power with it. And I think when we don't seek to be intentional about it, then we have to ask ourselves, like, what is the gospel about? Because so much of it is redemption in ways that we are fallen, and that can be seen by just having cross-cultural missions.
Oh, so good. So good. Dr. Hodge, hop on in.
This is difficult because it's kind of like the things that we daydream about. And so putting it into a word is the problem that's hard. This is what I would say. When it comes to love, we often, one, forget that it's an action, not a feeling. Two, we often overestimate how strong we are when it comes to love. That's what I found personally. I'll speak about myself. The reason why that's important is I think many of us who go on mission trips go with good hearts, and I think there are good intentions. What happens though is that when you leave the mission field, especially with a multicultural team, you now have a different frame of reference by which you're measuring your love. And that oftentimes will call for action. And sometimes those actions will find that we were not prepared to undertake. We were not ready for it. And most of the times where I've grown in my love is not because I hit a home run, it's because I struck out and missed and said, I'm going to get it the next time. I just want everybody who's listening to understand that's okay. I think that situation and putting yourself in a position to where at least you're at the plate ensures that there will be growth. What concerns me more than that is when we don't even go to the plate because we hear that it's so hard, it's so difficult. These multicultural teams, we don't need to really just preach the gospel. Everything will work out. You don't have to worry about that. Well, when we follow the example of our Savior, Jesus Christ, that's kind of that's not what he did. He spoke to those issues. He would talk about how you gave. He would talk about the Good Samaritan. You notice he didn't say the good Jew, he said the Good Samaritan, and he's talking to Jewish people. The woman at the well, one of the most powerful illustrations of cross-cultural love. She was not Jewish, she was Samaritan. He was very intentional, and she was a woman. He was very intentional about looking through different people's lenses and making sure that they understood the power and the love of God. And I think that's the greatest thing that I could ask and hope for in my own team, is that when they leave, they examine themselves and really reflect on those lessons that they have. And even more so, that they've prepared themselves to receive a lesson, that they really recognize that these trips are not just going to be about, I'm going to go give some food and medicine and I'm going to come back home and I can check a box. I'm going to encounter God. And the reason I'm going to encounter God is so that I can grow in my love and not just leave it on the mission field, but I can bring it to the American mission field when I come back home.
Yes.
Amen. Yeah. Love that. Dr. Maddox, what do you think?
So just to make sure I'm keeping track with you. So the question you're asking about is about bridging the gap between different races on the same team. Can you re-clarify?
Yeah. So, what would I'm going to be honest. I gave you a little bit of a softball into kind of what is your hope for it. So the low ball is, we've got hesitations and fears, not only of just other races, both on the field, but then also within your group. So you've got a people group that's that's afraid of another race, but then you also have your people on your team that this is not normal for them. And so part of it is how do you bridge that gap through their fears, but kind of leading that as an open door to. So then, what is your dream for this? Because that is what we're trying to do. We're trying to bridge that gap of fear so that we can really do something more significant together and be an echo of the kingdom. But what is some meaningful and realistic change that we would hope to see through this diversity of missions? Why are we doing it, and how do we move people through their fears? I hope that's helpful.
Yes, it is. So one of the biggest things that I'll say is be willing to take action. A lot of people always talk about how they don't want to do certain things because there's nobody that looks like them that wants to do it, but why not just be the person so that somebody else can have somebody else to look towards? Another thing that I think of is being willing to bridge the gap and actually call things out. Just again, I think about here in America, right? If you're in, whether it's in a predominantly white area or predominantly Black area, there are going to be some biases and stereotypes that come one way or the other. For example, sometimes if you're white and you're going to an all Black area, they may think this person might not have my best interests at heart. And as a Black person in that area, it may be worth sitting down with the people that look like you and saying, hey, this person is really here to help you. On the other end of that, being Black in a predominantly white area, sometimes they might think, I don't know if this guy's that competent, So it comes with two things, right? One, making sure that you are as competent as you can be, but two, also having people that don't look like you vouch for you and say, hey, no, he rolls with us or she rolls with us, and we've been doing this together, and there's absolutely nothing that you need to worry about. You're going to be taken care of regardless of what the person's skin color looks like. And once they get that care, that actually sometimes can surprise them. I've surprised a few folks myself. But once that's done, it really does break down that wall and open them up to thinking, oh man, maybe there is more to what these guys have going on here.
That person of peace strategy's got something to it, doesn't it? Like when you have a person of peace, that's what I just heard you say. When you have a person of peace, and I love what you said, be this someone else, but when you have a person of peace, man, that's a powerful thing. So Dr. Black, I'll let you close with your thoughts here. What do you think?
Wow, listen, as I'm listening, I just want to say ditto. I mean, just such good stuff. That's the challenge, of course, of always going last, trying to figure out, what do you say now? But there's still so much more to be said. And that's the thing I would want to say to people who are watching is that this is a beginning. Or this is another step for you. But there's so much more to still learn and so much more to still do. When I think about dealing with racial issues and reconciliation and redemption, we need to read, we need to educate ourselves. So talking about this idea of bridging the gap, we need to learn. I have this stack of books here, and you won't get a chance to see all of them, but I mean, man, so you want to talk about race, gracism, post-traumatic slave syndrome, how to heal our divide, white fragility, divided faith, winning the race against you. I mean, and the stack just goes on and on and on because we need to be educated. But what's my dream though? What do I hope? What I hope is to get to a place truly of oneness and inclusion, and not to just have people of color on the team, but to have people of color in key positions. Because when we think about the ministry of Jesus, yes, Jesus came to serve. And that's what we do when we go on the mission field. We go to serve. But Jesus put out an apron or a towel around his waist and he washed feet. But he also spoke in the synagogue. And so on the mission field, you ought to have people of color also speaking in the synagogues. They ought to be at the microphone. They need to be up front, not just behind the scene serving. And so we don't want to talk about just equality, but equity in serving. And it's not about making sure everybody is at the fence because everybody can't see at the same level. And giving everybody a box doesn't make them see at the same level. We need to tear down the fence. And so that's one of the things I would want to see happen is that we begin to tear down the things that divide us, that we begin to see differences with curiosity versus with contempt, to not just see people, but to go, wow. And to get excited about the fact that this is somebody who was also made in God's image. And I get a chance to see a different reflection of Christ. And I want to understand that reflection because I want to continue to become more and more like him every day. And we do that through missions by getting a chance to see the diversity of God's creation and marveling and wondering at what he has done.
I'm going to say something really quick because Dr. Black, you just said something and Dr. Maddox actually said it. And I just want to make sure our listeners heard it. One of the reasons why I was able to lead my trip through global health outreach At the time when we were deliberating who would be the trip leader to Ethiopia, there was myself and a very, very close friend of mine who's Hemonk. His name was Don Schaefer, who's a white man, an older white man. And they were going to select Don Schaefer. And Don Schaefer said, no, I'm removing myself from consideration, because I think what we need and what's most helpful for GHO is if Omari Hodge becomes the next trip leader. And I'm not saying that's a recipe for everybody,
Right.
but that type of intentionality to say, you know what, it's not about me. There's no drum major effect that I'm worrying about. I just want God to be glorified. And I think that will look differently in every situation. But what Dr. Black said and what Dr. Maddox was saying kind of alluded to that fact. I just wanted to give that little testimony.
I love that. And to your point, and you know, Dr. Joy, you said it earlier, it's, you know, passing the chalk is the way we say it here from, what's the name of the movie? I love the, but to really give a significant place of significance, gender, you know, to do that with female leaders, to do that when you're talking about socioeconomics, that plays so much into leadership as well, and how we lean into that. It's a deal. And so I feel like we could talk forever. I didn't know you all before this, but I love you already. I just love I love the Jesus that oozes out of you. It's the best. And so we just want to say to you, hopefully this gave you a little taste. I think you just heard a lot of people share from their heart just some wisdom and experience and passion. Even at the end there, to hear, you know, Dr. Joy, I love what you said. You said, they almost talked me out of it. There was a season when everybody was saying we shouldn't be doing this. But it's interesting that God was just saying, hey, I just don't want you to settle for what you've done. I'm calling you to something greater, something grander, something more colorful, and something far more powerful. And I love that. I love, Dr. Hodge, what you said when you said, man, you're going to have to give yourself grace, and you're going to have to lean in. You're going to have to keep growing. If you don't make some mistakes in this, you're not doing it right. So give yourself grace, receive the grace of Jesus, and build some people around you that can speak into you and cause you to grow. Dr. Maddox, be the someone else. Be the someone on the field that is going to paint a new picture of an intentionality. And it doesn't matter who those other people are. You be that person. You step into that position. And then Dr. Black, I just love you. I want to give you a hug. I don't know you, but I feel like I know you. But when you said we've got to say wow more, that hit me. That did. We just have to see people the way Jesus sees people. Man, this is someone who has been made in God's image into every culture, every socioeconomic, every gender, to look him in the eyes and say, wow, 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 wow. And what a gift. And so hopefully this has been a good time for you. You might even find these people off in the field. I have a feeling they've given their lives to this. But we're praying that you will give your life to it as well, that you will leverage your time and your talent and your resources, and not only your natural wiring, but the spiritual gifting that God has planted inside of you on purpose, and that you will leverage it for his glory, that you will leverage it for his kingdom, and that you will be color brave, color courageous, and shift the kingdom with that one and only life that he gave you. So such a blessing, y'all. Love you. Great to meet you. Such a good time. And hope to see you again. God bless.